Doom: The Dark Ages is one of the most technically impressive games you can play on a PC, and if you want to experience every ounce of its potential, then you're going to want to play it on a GPU from this video's sponsor, Nvidia. Unlock DLSS 4, multi-frame generation, and Nvidia Reflex thanks to Nvidia's cutting-edge hardware. Click below to check it out for yourself or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. I have some pretty mixed feelings about Doom: The Dark Ages, but I'll tell you what I feel most of all, grateful, because while I don't love this game as much as I love 2016, and I don't think it's as mechanically rich as Doom Eternal, I'm just really glad that id Software is out here taking big swings. Like, imagine the courage and work ethic it would take to completely redesign your core gameplay loop for each new entry in a trilogy. That's just not how it's done in the modern era. We're very used to iterative sequels that have landed on a core gameplay model and that's stretched out over 1, 2, 3 or more games, but id really did go back to the drawing board with Eternal, and they've done it again here with the Dark Ages. And while everyone is going to have their own opinion on which parts of which game work best for them versus which ones don't, the fact is this studio has put out 3 AAA, high-quality, ambitious, innovative, single-player shooters inside of a 10-year window, and that is genuinely fucking incredible in this era of game making. Doom: The Dark Ages is clearly a response to people who didn't enjoy the weapon swapping and ammo management of Doom Eternal. In Eternal, id wanted you to play the game their way, but here in Dark Ages, the choice is put back in the hands of the player. Here, the focus is very much on you using whichever weapon you please, with ammo and health flowing freely so you can focus on this feeling of endless aggression. You really do feel like a great hammer swinging wildly, almost indiscriminately to be honest, and while that's objectively less tactical and demanding than what Doom Eternal asked of you, I think it also unlocks this new feeling of being the berserker. So often you'll charge right into an enemy's face, unloading everything that you have as quickly as possible, grinning with glee as you turn their own attacks against them. With a gameplay model that incentivizes full frontal assault more than ever before, Dark Ages incites a bloodlust that I think surpasses what both 2016 and Eternal were able to achieve. But I do think that's pretty much the only area where Doom: The Dark Ages distinguishes itself, and I suspect that many Doom fans will look back at 2016 and Eternal as better games, or at the very least, just ones that they prefer more. Doom Eternal's combat model is still held up as a high watermark even today, and even if you didn't enjoy its particular flavor, it's impossible to not at least respect its brilliance, depth, sophistication, and replayability. In contrast, Dark Ages' less prescriptive combat model is great for those looking for something more accessible and straightforward, but it's probably going to leave Eternal fans a little underwhelmed. For those fans, I don't expect Dark Ages will stay installed on their hard drives the same way that Eternal has all these years later. For fans of Doom 2016, a lot of people, myself included, really love that game for its tone, its storytelling, and its music, and unfortunately, all of those things are substantially weaker here in Doom: The Dark Ages. The overall tone of this game feels far more juvenile than ever before, with a plotline and characters that feels like a MA-rated He-Man. The dragon flying missions and mech levels are not the worst thing ever, but they're also not good, and the OST is sadly just a massive, massive downgrade versus the work of Mick Gordon, and the audio mix seems to know this, since it's often super hard to hear any of the music at all. I'm certain that most of the discourse around Doom: The Dark Ages will center on comparisons to the other games in the modern trilogy, because both of those games are genre-defining masterpieces in their own ways and for different reasons. My theory about Doom: The Dark Ages is that id weren't trying to surpass what they had done before. I don't think they were preoccupied with potential review scores or Reddit discourse or YouTube essays. I don't think they were allowing themselves to be burdened by the legacy of this franchise or the weight of expectations or the sorts of unflattering comparisons that might emerge when comparing this game to Eternal or to 2016. I think they were just trying to make a fun-ass video game full of heaps of new ideas, and I suspect they were comfortable with the fact that not all of those ideas would land. You know what Doom: The Dark Ages feels like? It feels like a spin-off, like a modern-day Far Cry Blood Dragon or something. It's id swinging for the fences with a new time period, a new setting, new characters, a new story, new core gameplay, new gimmicks, new everything. Id have spent more than 15 years working on this new Doom trilogy, and I think they just wanted to have some fun making this one, and that really comes through, because despite Dark Ages' many shortcomings, I had a hell of a lot of fun playing this one, pun intended. When it comes to storytelling in the modern Doom games, I think Doom 2016 had it down cold. the Slayer was less a man and more a force of nature. The less we knew about him, the better, because our imagination could fill the gaps. The game didn't have lengthy cutscenes that would vividly depict images or events. It was, for the most part, holograms and voice recordings and codec entries. Those who wanted to dive deep into the lore and storyline could do that if they chose to, while the rest of us were happy just to let the overall vibes suffice, and the vibes were excellent. Doom Eternal was not content with that. While it didn't overplay its hand and never felt bogged down by storytelling, it definitely picked a lane that set it apart from 2016. Things that were hinted at and alluded to previously would now become the basis for a fully fledged storyline, one that positioned the Slayer as connected to an ancient order of protectors, locked in an eternal battle with Hell, hence the title. Doom the Dark Ages goes way, way, way further than even what Doom Eternal was doing, and I don't think it's to the game's benefit. Part of it is just the fact that I don't think this story stuff works very well on its own merits here in Doom the Dark Ages. The gist is this: the Slayer is a super weapon controlled by a race of alien dudes who are kind of like the Covenant in 4K. When the human sentinels can't push back the demonic hordes, the Slayer is deployed as a sort of in case of emergency break glass failsafe thing. And when he's done his job, he's beamed back up to his holding pen like a racehorse after a derby. Anyway, shock horror, the Slayer eventually escapes captivity, and while he's pissed at his captors, he's even more pissed at the forces of Hell who are chasing a MacGuffin thing. Thus begins the MacGuffin Chase daisy chain, where various artifacts and relics and keys and power sources all need to be either obtained or unleashed in order to stop Hell's latest incursion into the land of the living. I know there's plenty of popular sentiment that says, hey, why worry about story in a Doom game, bro? That's like going to Cornhub and complaining about the acting. And look, yeah, I agree to an extent. You can absolutely just hit the spacebar and all of this stuff and skip it. But there's a lot of it to skip, and none of it's good, so I don't think it's unfair to be at least a little critical of it. Here's the thing, right? I think your average Doom fan is getting older, right? Like, I'm gonna guess the average age of people buying a full price new release Doom game is like 30 plus years old, right? Why then do we have this storyline that's, you know, like I said in the intro, kind of like Masters of the Universe, but with gore? It's a collection of really played out tropes that we've all seen dozens of times before, and none of it offers a unique spin on any of the things that have inspired it. The aliens look a little too Halo, the humans look a little too Gears of War, the way the Slayer is presented is a little too Space Marine, the portrayal of Hell's forces is a little too Diablo. Hell, there's even some Eldritch tentacle monsters in there at one point who look exactly like every other Eldritch tentacle monster you've ever seen. And I think that's a really crucial point when talking about Dark Ages storytelling. All of the things it's leaning on, I'm already well serviced in those areas by other franchises. The defining aspect of the modern Doom trilogy is the innovation it brings to bear in its gameplay, so it's a real shame that the story side of the game is defined by how utterly generic it feels. I think there's also a core problem with the presentation of the Doom Slayer. In the past, creative director Hugo Martin has spoken about how the framing of the Slayer was inspired by that scene from RoboCop when he's first brought online and he's walking through the police precinct, but you can't quite see him, or you're only seeing things through his eyes. It leverages that Spielberg idea where the scariest monster is the one that you can't quite see. In Doom the Dark Ages, you see a lot of the Slayer, and so that sense of awe that he's supposed to engender is quickly lost. Combined with how silly and juvenile this storyline is, Dark Ages starts to feel less like RoboCop 1 and more like RoboCop 3. And if you've seen RoboCop 3, you would know that that's not a flattering comparison. Anyway, look, I don't want to make too big a deal of this because, yeah, you can spacebar through all of it. And honestly, I kind of think you should. I promise you, you're really not missing out on anything. And while we don't buy Doom games for their storylines, it would have been nice for all the effort that went into this stuff to have resulted in something worth experiencing. Doom the Dark Ages is a technical marvel, and honestly, that is the least surprising thing you'll ever hear because it's id Software we're talking about, and I can think of few studios that has a better, more reliable track record when it comes to technology. Dark Ages is an id Tech 8 game, and if you're at all familiar with this engine, then you would know that id probably performed some demonic ritual in order to summon it into existence. Mere mortals alone could not have created something that looks this good and runs this well. Yeah, sure, I was playing on a high-end PC, absolutely, but you'd be surprised how often that doesn't help these days since most PC port optimization is utter garbage. Not Dark Ages though. 4K absolutely cranked settings across the board, and I was still getting over 100 frames a second in most instances. zero crashes, zero bugs, just technically flawless in a way that makes you feel utterly spoiled in this modern era of half-baked ports and buggy unfinished releases. But what of art design? Well, you've been looking at the gameplay this whole time, so it feels almost redundant to say it aloud, but yeah, Doom the Dark Ages looks fucking awesome. Part of that is the technical aspect, where id have been able to put more detail into every inch of the image while still maintaining incredible performance. Part of it are these skyboxes, which create a real sense of place, like the endless war of hell rages around you while you play your own pivotal part. The biggest part, though, is the overall art design. The decision to set Dark Ages in the distant past has allowed id's artists to run absolutely wild, inventing an all-new visual language for their universe that is perfectly in keeping with everything that's come before it, or after it, I guess, but you know what I mean. The environments of Dark Ages move seamlessly back and forth from sci-fi to medieval fantasy, and yeah, it's similar-ish to what Destiny and Warhammer 40k does, but I think the visuals find their own unique footing in a way that the storytelling just doesn't. This does look like its own fresh thing here, it really does, and without giving too much away, there are some settings at the back end of the game that really stand out, both visually and thematically. I think everyone's going to get a real kick out of those. One of the defining aspects of Dark Ages is the way it changes up the approach to level design in a Doom game. The previous two entries were strictly linear affairs. Some levels might have had some branching pathways this way or that, but by and large, it was all corridors leading into combat arenas, which led into more corridors, which led into more combat arenas. And honestly, no complaints on that front, since the level design provided just enough exploration, pacing, and environmental storytelling for things to hang together beautifully. But if you were someone that at some point hoped for more explorable spaces, then boy oh boy is Dark Ages made for you. To be clear, there are a number of linear levels in the game's 22 mission long campaign, but not too many. Most of the time, the levels that you'll step into are these expansive freeform maps where you can go in any direction you please and accomplish objectives in whatever order you like. Most of the time, it's stuff like destroy 3 Hellgates, and there's one at each corner of the map, and it makes no difference which one you go after first or last. I'm going to be really interested to see how people respond to these new level layouts, because personally, I really enjoy them, but they do come at the expense of the sort of tight, breakneck pacing that I'm sure many Doom fans enjoy. The levels aren't huge, but their twisting, turning points of interconnectivity can make them a little tricky to navigate. But when you do arrive at a combat arena, it's the same good times you've come to expect. But we'll talk more about that in the combat block. It's what's between these arenas that's particularly new and novel here in Dark Ages. There's a hell of a lot of secrets squirreled away in the nooks and crannies of these levels, sometimes upwards of 10 or 12. They're always relatively easy to find owing to a map that you can bring up with the press of a button, and it shows you really clearly where that secret is, and based on the map layout, you can usually guess how to get there. I guess my one criticism of this open world design that's so leveraged into secret hunting, you really do spend a lot of time in this map, far more than I would have liked. I think some of the satisfaction that comes from these secrets is lost when the path to them is so clearly signposted, and I think the utility of the map means you're spending too much time letting it guide you rather than your own sense of curiosity or because you spied something interesting off in the distance. So while I don't think the way id pulled this off is perfect, and while I expect some people won't like it, I personally really enjoyed this approach to level design. After 2 games spent barreling through linear levels, it was nice to experience something different, and the optional nature of objectives let me set my own pace, and then I could take my time and do absolutely everything, or I could just barrel past it all and head straight to the objective marker. Much like the combat model, you, not id, will decide how you play Doom the Dark Ages. And I guess that's probably a neat segue into the most important part of this experience. As interested as I am to hear Doom fans react to this new level design, I am way more interested to hear their reactions to this new combat model, because I predict people are going to have some strong thoughts on this one. So right off the top, I'll tell you, I really like it. I do think it's a little bit of an overcorrection to many of the issues people had with Doom Eternal, but what's here still works brilliantly, and it results in a very cathartic Doom experience, similar to what 2016 was, but significantly evolved while also harkening back to the classic Doom games, just as id said they wanted to do. So where to begin with this? Well, I think the first thing you should know is that if we're talking about the difficulty presets that id have calibrated, this is a hell of a lot easier than Doom Eternal. I think I played Doom Eternal on the normal mode and I found it pretty tricky at times. I played this one on ultra violence, so one step up from normal mode, and I think the phrase cakewalk might be a little strong, but it was definitely in that ballpark. I would say that if you're at all comfortable with shooters, you absolutely have to play on that ultra violence difficulty, and if you're a confident FPS player, then you should probably head straight into Nightmare, because I kind of wish I did that. But this conversation is a little different this time around because of how id are approaching difficulty in Dark Ages. Those core difficulties I listed are really just presets for a vast number of difficulty options, and you can tune those options however you please. Things like enemy damage output, your damage output, game speed, parry window, and a whole bunch of other stuff can be tweaked like never before, making this both the most accessible and most challenging Doom yet. It's some very cool work from id that's going to make this game playable to a whole bunch of people who might have been unable to play this, and it's going to give highly skilled players and speedrunners a huge amount of ways to crank the challenge. This more flexible approach to difficulty is really in keeping with the overall design ethos of Dark Ages. Flexibility is the watchword in level design, in pacing, but in particular in combat. Doom Eternal is rather famous for how prescriptive its combat model was. Its enemies were each a padlock that would only accept a certain type of key, aka weapon. You could brute force the lock by using a different weapon, but that's not really how the game was designed to be played, and so you'd be punished for it by way of ammo shortages, a shortcoming that would compound when the next enemy spawned in requiring a specific weapon, but you just spent all of your ammo for that weapon on the last enemy, on and on it went. An extremely well-built but also extremely inflexible combat model that engendered a real love or hate response. Either Doom Eternal was your absolute goat and you've been chasing that high ever since, or Doom Eternal was just too much and you put it down like the 4th mission. The load-bearing pillars in Doom Dark Ages aren't weapon swapping or ammo management, they're parrying and melee. Almost every enemy you encounter in the game will have both ranged and melee attacks, and if those attacks glow green, you can parry them with your shield. This briefly stuns them, giving you an opening to attack, and it also refills your melee ability, which does a huge amount of damage at a base level, and considerably more damage than that as you unlock various melee upgrades. So here's why this combat model totally rules, and I love it. Doom 2016 coined the term push forward combat, where you were incentivized to move toward the enemy rather than away, because you got your sustain from glory kills. Eternal took this further by tying your ammo economy to those glory kills, but Eternal also invited you to stand back on occasion when a specific weapon or enemy type demanded it. In Doom the Dark Ages, there are almost zero circumstances where you don't want to be immediately face tanking every enemy you see. Whoever or whatever spawns on the battlefield, the best thing you can do is run straight up to them and engage them at point blank range. And you can do that really easily thanks to your shield charge, which basically teleports you to any target on the battlefield. When you are up in their grill, that is when you can lay down huge melee haymakers and then parry their attacks to recharge your melee attacks while unloading super shotgun rounds into their skull whenever you have a free second. This playstyle is so incentivized that there are certain enemy types who basically can't be killed at range because they're too protected. You need to get up close to them. This playstyle is so incentivized that there's an upgrade for your rocket launcher that makes it so that after you parry an enemy attack, your rocket splash damage that would otherwise hurt you actually heals you. So you're essentially just shooting rockets at point blank when this kicks in, and it's glorious. All of these things in aggregate, the parrying, the shield charge, the melee attacks and how they recharge, the enemy design which invites all of this, no other game has channeled the spirit of the Berserker better than Doom the Dark Ages does. When I get going in this game and shit really starts clicking, there is a genuine bloodlust that comes over me, like this feeling of just wanting to rip and tear until it is done. The previous games have both done a great job of inciting this feeling, but I don't think either of them have done it as well or do it as regularly as Dark Ages does. id Software said that we were like a fighter jet in Doom Eternal, but here we're like a tank, and I think that's true, but I'd characterize it slightly differently. In Eternal, we were like a tiger, fast and always aiming for the jugular of whatever we were hunting, but here we're like a bear, just fucking mauling every one of our targets, one after the other. So that feeling absolutely rules, but it does come at a great cost, and I'd say perhaps too great a cost. Even if you didn't vibe with Eternal's combat model, you couldn't but respect it. So much of it was genius, and it's a shame that rather than adapting its best aspects, much of it has just been tossed away. Weapon swapping is the perfect example. In Eternal, weapon swapping was instant because it had to be. The whole combat model was predicated on you quickly switching back and forth between weapons based on which enemies you were facing. In Dark Ages, there is a very, very long global cooldown that kicks in after you use a melee or shield attack, which stops you from queuing up a weapon swap, and when you do swap, the animation is fairly lengthy. I'm sure there are good balance reasons for this, but it's honestly just really frustrating, as I'd regularly find myself in situations where I'd want to quickly switch to my shotgun or whatever after getting ambushed by a demon, only I couldn't do it for 2 or 3 seconds, which felt like an eternity. When people complained about forced weapon swapping in Doom Eternal, I don't think they were saying that they didn't want to be able to change weapons when they wanted to. They were saying, stop forcing us to change so often. I think id overcorrected here. Same goes for enemy design. Eternal's enemies required specific weapons and specific tactics, so much so that many people found it oppressive. Here in Dark Ages, the opposite is true. Every single enemy is fought the same way, which is, like I said, run up to their face and start swinging. Again, I don't think anyone was asking for enemies to not have unique weaknesses. We just wanted more options to exploit those weaknesses. Once again, I do think id went too far here. These issues really show their teeth toward the back end of the game, where the combat arenas really start to break down. It just throws a ton of shit at you all at once, and with how prolonged those engagements are, you start to notice how little this combat model is asking of you. All of this culminates in a final boss encounter, which is very, very bad, to the point where I do wonder if it's the result of a development deadline, because I refuse to believe that a studio this talented and who put this much work into the past 3 games would settle for such a disappointing final encounter. I was definitely one of the people who didn't vibe with Eternal's combat, preferring the flexibility of 2016. For that reason, I honestly prefer the combat in Doom Dark Ages more, because it does give me that freedom and decision making that Eternal didn't, plus that bloodlust feeling is really addictive. But if I'm being totally honest, I do respect the combat design of Doom Eternal more. I'll freely admit that it's better constructed and will have a much longer shelf life than I expect Dark Ages will. As much as I had a great time shooting and doming demons in Dark Ages, I do wish that id had carried over at least a few of the things that made Eternal so great. There are some other things about Doom the Dark Ages that don't exactly float my boat. The dragon riding missions, for one, I spoke about them in my preview. I didn't like them then, I like them even less now. I really don't know how id got it so wrong. Riding a sick-ass cyber dragon should have been a slam dunk, but owing to a baffling control scheme, it really sucks, and I was always bummed out whenever I had to hop on that thing. Thankfully, there isn't too much of it, so it's not too big a deal. Same goes for the mech missions. It's obviously near and dear to Hugo Martin's heart, given his Pacific Rim background. It's cool spectacle, it's a bit of mindless fun, but it's ultimately just really one-dimensional padding that you could kind of just delete from the game, and I think the game would be better for it. Again, not too many of these missions though, so not a big deal. Music though, man, I feel so bad for anyone who has to follow in Mick Gordon's footsteps. Fuck that. I cannot imagine a worse gig. I was really rooting for the team of composers who were replacing Mick, because everyone would have loved to have seen this team succeed, but unfortunately it just didn't come together. Barring 1 or 2 tracks that do hit right, the rest of the OST just sounds super generic. It really lacks the uniqueness and flair that made Mick's work such genius. It's a real shame that Marty and Mick couldn't sort this mess out somehow, because sadly, Doom the Dark Ages suffers immensely from Mick's absence. So this is one of those outros where I feel like I need to justify why I am recommending this game. I mean, I said the story sucks, the combat is less sophisticated than Doom Eternal, the dragon riding sucks, the mechs suck, the OST is a downgrade. Why am I recommending this? Well, the honest answer is because it's really, really fun, and that is the bottom line that we should never lose sight of when critically evaluating video games. We can nitpick a game until the cows come home, but if you have fun playing it, then that's the ball game. I spent 20 hours with Doom the Dark Ages and I enjoyed almost every one of them. Visually, it's spectacular, and the technical performance is in another solar system compared to the optimization we typically get this day and age. The open play and level design is a really welcome change that allows you to set your own pace, just as the new difficulty options allow you to precisely calibrate how easy or tough this experience should be. The core combat model is unique and fresh in that you've never played a shooter quite like this before. It's a 3D bullet hell, fantasy melee action game hybrid. It's Doom crossed with Returnal, crossed with Skyrim, crossed with Sekiro, and if that isn't a sick as hell combination, then I don't know what is. It's really only in comparing it to the depth and sophistication of Eternal that we can see where it falters, but despite those shortcomings, it more than stands on its own 2 feet as a combat model that's worth experiencing for how often it will get your blood flowing and how it incites this frenzied feeling that I don't think any other game, even Eternal, can match. Rolling credits on Doom the Dark Ages, my thoughts turn to the future of id Software. Perhaps it's wishful thinking, but Dark Ages felt a little bit like a send-off for how playful it is. Like I said, it has that kind of spin-off energy almost. Like id were just letting off steam with this one after 15 years of working on this modern trilogy. Each one of these modern releases has had their highs or lows, but as a body of work, it's hard to point to many developers who have had such a consistent track record and who have had so much impact on a genre or on the industry at large. My hope is that id turn their attention to something totally new next, but who knows what might be in store for them. But now I can tell you though that Doom the Dark Ages is a good video game. It's on Game Pass, so it's super easy to get your hands on. You're gonna have a good time playing it. I recommend it to you. So that's Doom: The Dark Ages, and as we've discussed, it runs incredibly well and looks great while doing it, but that's very much what we've come to expect from id. They don't mess around. But there are ways that you can push this game's fidelity and performance even further, and almost all of those ways rely on technology from this video's sponsor, Nvidia. Nvidia 50 series GPUs deliver game-changing capabilities that transform the way you play. One of the biggest headline features that Nvidia 50 series GPUs offers is multi-frame generation. This is technology that can add up to 3 additional frames per rendered frame, and that means in games like Doom: The Dark Ages, you can push upwards of 300 frames per second, resulting in the smoothest possible frame rate experience while fully utilizing the capabilities of high refresh rate TVs and monitors. But even without that technology enabled, the raw processing power of a 50 series GPU is unmatched. Playing on an RTX 5090 without any frame gen tech enabled, I was able to run at 4K, every single setting set to Ultra Nightmare, which is id's version of Max, and I was getting over 100 FPS with DLSS set to quality. And that DLSS hits different in Doom: Dark Ages because it's actually DLSS 4, one of the headline offerings of Nvidia's next generation GPUs. DLSS is a technology that essentially reconstructs an image using AI models, and this latest iteration of it delivers enhancements to super resolution, deep learning anti-aliasing, and ray reconstruction. If you don't know what all that means, don't worry. Bottom line, games that utilize DLSS to hit desired frame rates, which is most of them these days, will look better when powered by DLSS 4. DLSS 4 and multi-frame gen both give you the sort of headroom you'll need if you want to enable ray tracing, which is yet another feature that Doom: The Dark Ages supports. In fact, path tracing and DLSS ray reconstruction is going to be available soon after launch, so we're talking industry-leading technology that results in the most detailed and most immersive visuals you can experience on a PC. Finally, Doom: The Dark Ages also supports Nvidia Reflex, which is a technology that reduces input latency by 50%. This is hugely beneficial in a game like Doom, where split-second reaction timing really matters, especially on those harder difficulties. Doom: The Dark Ages is a marquee release that is the perfect showcase for this newly arrived generation of GPU hardware, allowing you to maximize resolutions, fidelity, frame rates, and responsiveness thanks to DLSS 4, ray tracing, multi-frame generation, and Nvidia Reflex. To learn more about Nvidia's game-changing hardware, click the link below. Thanks to Nvidia for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.